Welcome to Constructive Thinking, a podcast by the Progressive Contractors Association of Canada. My name is Paul DeYoung, the CEO of PCA. Today, we will be talking with Lindsay Langill, drawing on his deep background in apprenticeships, credentialing, and training. Welcome, Lindsay. Welcome.
Yeah, thanks, Paul. Glad to be on the show.
Thank you. Well, let's begin, Lindsay, by asking you to introduce yourself. Tell us a bit about your background, your work history. What areas are you focused on? What's your passion?
Yeah, absolutely. So, Lindsay Langill, and I've been in the industry for a long time and, known to many, but I started out as a young guy, and I think it was the advice of my mom who said to me, she said, "I don't care what you do, son, but you got to get a trade." And I really didn't even know what a trade was when I was going through high school. And, back in those days, we had counselors within the school system, but we didn't have what we have today, and that we have career counselors that are in our school system that will help people and help young kids, get into trades if a university focus it in their vision. So I started out, working as a young guy in the shake and shingle mill while I was finishing high school, and kind of got a good understanding of what millwrights did and heavy duty mechanics. So I had some idea. And I found out that, a lot of that was you're working in the cold, and I don't do cold that well. So my mom said to me, "I know a guy who is a fourth class power engineer, and that's what you should be." So I started out and I did a pre-apprenticeship as a fourth class power engineer. And the one thing about that was, yes, I was nice and warm working around power boilers and recovery boilers. So I spent a couple of years as a fourth class power engineer and was working at a company in Nanaimo called Harmac, which is a big pulp and paper mill here in British Columbia. And after 2 years, I was that kind of person that I was an achiever and I wanted to move up. So I started doing correspondence courses at night and to get my third class. And then I was told that, well, it's great, son, that you're doing this, but, unless the guy in front of you leaves or retires, there's 15 years that you're just going to be as a fourth class. Well, not being the kind of person that, like somebody holding me back, I quit. And my mom and dad just went right off the deep end about that because, in the late, that time around 80, it was tough to get jobs. But I came over to Vancouver and I started working for a pipeline company, and I wanted to be a pipeline welder. And so again, they didn't put you into that. You had to start at the bottom, as we would call it. You're on the muck stick or the shovel in the ditch in the worst conditions with rain coming down, etc. But if you could prove yourself, then the company would invest in you. And I think that's still a really good takeaway today for companies that are looking at, the potential of who's growing within their company, that, look at the work ethic, look at the commitment, look at the attitude, and then see if they're worth investing in. And don't hold back, and start working through a good conversation with those people so that you keep them within your company. So I quickly started doing my training, my welding training at night. We would work 10, 12 hours a day, and then I would go, to school in the evening, and slowly got my welding tickets. And then 21, I became the youngest foreman that the company ever sent north to some of the northern pipeline work that we were doing at that time. People that know the pipeline industry, recognize that there's few months there that you have off because of weather. So again, not being a person that wanted to sit around, I came back and I went to one of our mills and I said, now I've got my red seal as a welder, I want to become a red seal millwright. And so they said, well, because you can weld, we'll take you in as an apprentice and you can help us with the welding. So short story there is that I worked part-time with them off and on through the pipeline duration, and ended up getting my red seal in welding, in millwrighting as well. So I have a fourth class power engineer. I'm a red seal welder and a red seal millwright. And then, so that was, that was sort of my trades trajectory when I was younger.
I've known you a long time, and I didn't even know that. That's impressive. And maybe this is a bridge for me to ask you go back to your comment about your parents urging you to go into a trade, or as it turned out, trades plural. There's something I want to get back to and later on in terms of multi-ticketing or multi-skilling, but we'll hold on to that one. The reason I wanted to talk about what your parents encouraged you to do, Lindsay, is that it seems as though maybe this has been going on for a long time, but I'm going to say today in quotation marks, our Canadian society, writ large, has kind of devalued opportunities in skilled trades and has made it seem as though that's sort of a second class kind of an activity. And years ago, I think you know this, myself and a bunch of other industry folk went on a fact-finding mission with then federal HRSD Minister Jason Kenney to Germany and the UK. And one of the big takeaways, there was a few, was this concept that became known and is, I think, quite widely known in our marketplace as parity of esteem, which is trying to elevate and rehabilitate the image of skilled trades in the consciousness of Canadians, and mums and dads and guidance counselors and society in general. Talk a little bit about your thoughts on parity of esteem. Like how important is it to emphasize that, and how can we get that nailed down in Canada?
Yeah, no, that's a great question, and one that comes up all the time. And so let me just preface this and before I answer it, because I think it will put it into context. After I left trades, and I really didn't want to, but I decided that I would like to be involved from an academic side of it. So I ended up doing a Bachelor of Education, and I taught high school in the shops mostly and some science for a few years. Then I did a master's, went into the admin side, and then I actually did my doctorate degree at the University of Calgary. And my doctoral dissertation was on youth apprenticeship and the value to the economy. And it's online, you can read it. And there's a lot of questions that I answered or I got answered through a variety of stakeholders that time. And this was one of the things that will answer your question, is that I wanted to know where the largest influences to the younger generation was coming from. And it still showed that it was, dual pronged, in that the parents had a big influence on the direction of their kids, and second, the peer pressure. So again, those are two areas, or as I call them, areas and arenas of influence that I think that if construction associations and, industry want to be effective in, molding the younger generation to filling these, it would be good. The second part of that is, yes, there's still a stigma out there that trades are second to everything else. But as you were mentioning, that is not the case in Germany. And obviously, which I haven't talked about, maybe we'll talk about this in another podcast at some point, was the 8 years that I spent as the Dean of Trades and Technology at Thompson Rivers University in Kamloops, where I was doing a lot of vocational or trades, bridging it to the academic world. And what we were able to do there is build 2 degrees that were bachelors in trades and technology leadership and bachelor in secondary trades education, so that tradespeople could quickly advance through and to become, shop teachers, for words that people understand, within the school system. So again, by doing that, people realized that getting a trade wasn't a bad thing. It wasn't a closed door at the end. Actually, when you get your red seal, it's now opening a multitude of doors that you are now prepared to enter. If you so wish, you can go in and start your own business. You can continue working for yourself. You can work for, companies, or you can go on now and do academic degrees and go into positions of leadership. And this was the way that I saw this happening in European countries, countries that I had gone to and spoken at large conferences around vocational education and the value of stuff. So again, that is one way that we can break down the barriers. And I'll just end at this before your next question, is that for 1 year before I joined the Industry Training Authority in British Columbia as their Senior Director of Program Standards, I worked at the Ministry of Education in Victoria. And my role there was to build out what was called the secondary school apprenticeship program, where kids that were working in trades areas, if they put in 240 to 480 hours of work as a registered apprentice, and in British Columbia, you can be a registered apprentice from the age of 15, then you would get up to 16 credits towards graduation. And the ministry was giving money for that. So we grew that program. But when I went around and spoke to the 60 school districts, the theme, the message that came loud and clear from every school district and the parents was, the reason that we don't want our kids going into trades is we're not sure if they'll come home at night, either alive or without injury. And I think that is a message that, if there's nothing else that anybody remembers out of this podcast, it's how do we make sure that we do everything we can to make sure that these young people are coming home at night. And again, there's a whole topic on that we can talk about, the authenticity of training and bringing real life experiences into training that create that segue to the workplace. So it's not such a abrupt change between the environment that they train in or the school system versus where they're going on industry. So hopefully that answers your question a little bit.
Yeah, there's so much there. I can't help but think on the comment that you made about your work at Thompson Rivers University and the I'm going to say the integration between trades training and the academic path, because, my observation has been that we've kind of bifurcated those things and said that they're not connectable. And I think that that's a false dichotomy. Certainly they're different bodies of work, but, again, in Germany, and you'll know this from your experience and your travels, one of the things we uncovered in Germany is that most people in, for example, the engineering profession began their education, if you want to put it that way, in the trades. And so you have engineers who have a trade certificate in their pocket, which itself shows that there's a connection between the two paths, but also using the engineer profession as an example, how important is it that engineers understand how things are built that they're designing? I think that itself is an amazing, but that's not the only profession. There's all these other ones like starting your own business, et cetera. So it's a powerful testimony that you've made to the mistake in Canada of saying that if you're either going to be as Johnny or Sally, you're either going to go to an academic track or you're going to go on a trades track. Well, that's a false choice to ask these young people to make.
Yeah, exactly. One of the things that, we talk about how things are done in other countries, and, every country has their own set of, I wouldn't call them rules, but their own mechanisms that actually work for them. And there are so many crossovers, but one of the things that when we look to some of the leading countries that, bring the trades or the craft together with the academic side, Australia is certainly one, Scotland, Ireland, Germany, and many of these. And the one thing that they have in place that we do not have in Canada is what's called a national qualification framework. Now, what a national qualification framework is, without boring people to death, is it's taking chunks of what we learn without putting labels on them. So I'll give you an example. We all communicate. So that would be built into a box. We all work in teams. So really in the academic world, that's called cooperative learning. And they build these blocks together and it just flows. And then they put categories around them. So you're a level 1, a level 2, so forth. So then now when they look at that, so if I had a trades qualification and I was going to apply for a bachelor's degree, they would look at and they would be able to put it into this national qual framework and say, okay, you've done these. So now you don't have to take these courses in year 1 of your bachelor's degree in communication and teamwork and maybe maths and physics, because if I'd done a trade that had some of that in it, It's all built into this qual framework. So now it expedites or it ramps up and even encourages people to be lifelong learners. So this is always something, when we want to talk about, and again, this is maybe something else we talked about in a different session, is how can we advance or how can we create a new model of training? One of the things is that why would we, if a person is doing this trade and then a second trade, why would we want them to do all the communication side again? Why would we want them to do all the occupational health and safety again? If it's in a trade that has rigging and hoisting, why would we do that again? They've already done that. They're doing it every day. That bores a lot of these people because there's a whole difference in the way learning is structured. We call it pedagogy versus andragogy. And I know those are, kind of terms out there that most people wouldn't understand, but it is the difference between how kids up to about 19, 20 learn versus how adults learn. And adults of the andragogy, they want to take control of their learning. So when they're slapped with something that says you got to do this to this, and they say, well, I've already done this, and they hear, well, we don't care, you're going to do it again, they walk away. I mean, that's the adult side. So again, when we're developing courses and programs in areas of study, understanding that bifurcation between pedagogy and andragogy and how it works into learning theories and how to create programs of distinction that will look at the outcomes versus that thou must go from A to Z all in one path. It really changes the dynamics and it creates what I call robust programs that will actually capture people and want them to take these courses.
Well, that's unbelievably fascinating. I'm tempted to ask you, but I think it might be a deeper question. Can Canada latch on to that mode of thinking? Like you mentioned Australia and I think Scotland. What's preventing Canada from maybe not adopting that full stop, but understanding the power of those concepts that you've outlined?
I'm not sure that we'll ever get to that national qualification framework. I've been in the industry and the academic world for a long time. And even, back when I was in government 25 years ago, we were trying to, look at a national qual framework. And there's just so many different bodies that it has to move through. I just don't see that happening. However, I think that if we were to start in an area, and let's just take trades as an example, and put it in there as proof of concept, that we could do ourselves a lot of, help us in many ways. And I'll give you an example. I know this is something that you and I have talked about off record before. It's how do we dual credential people without making them do 4 years of this one and 4 years of that one. Again, if we looked at all the commonalities that are between the various trades and we, moved those to either a challenge piece to make sure that they were, or what I would call a verification of competency, then we moved them into the areas that they don't know that they have to be trained up in.
Well, I'm glad you mentioned that because that was one of the topics I wanted to get at, which is to me, I call it two sides of the coin. One is multi-skilling, but the other one is dual or multiple ticketing. And we've done a little bit of work at PCA to understand some of the barriers. There's a cost factor of going back to school, which is real. But there's also the fact that the student faces the prospect of recovering ground that they already covered. And what you're describing is a more nimble system that says, hey, you already taught this. You don't have to get taught that again. Let's break ground on the fresh things, the new things that this person needs to learn to get that second ticket.
Yeah, and that's exactly right. So we have the various distinct trades, and I understand that way back in time, if you wanted to become a carpenter, typically that's what you worked at, and you were a carpenter. And if you were a pipe fitter, you typically worked in that area. Now what we're seeing, because of shortage of trade skilled people, and also people who have, a good educational background. They've come through their grade 12, and some of them actually even have a college degree before they get into trades. They actually would like to have dual tickets or two, because again, as I say, quite a few years back, our K-12 school system adopted the term, you've got to be a lifelong learner. And we all use those words, be a lifelong learner, learn, learn, learn. However, I don't think we really understood the ramifications of that. And that lifelong learning means that now some of these people say, I want to be a tradesperson in this and this and this and this. So how is that done? How is that crossover? So I'll say this, that some trades cross over a lot easier than others do. So again, when I look at, my background, and I said I started out as a red seal welder, and then I went and I became a red seal millwright. That was an easy crossover because there's welding in industrial millwright or mechanic as there is in welding. There's machining in millwright that I had in my 4th class power engineering training. So again, there's those crossovers. So those are the building blocks, or as I say, that that can be found in that national qualification framework, those modules that you would look at and you say, okay, these are the same, click, click, click. So now you're only going to do this. However, I'll put the warning on the package here, is just because you've taken the course and you've done the theory aspect doesn't mean that you can do it in the field, because if you haven't done it for a while, doesn't mean. And, I look at myself. Yeah, red seal. However, I haven't been in the field for a long time. I don't feel that I would be competent to just walk in there and do the job. So one of the quality pieces that I would highly suggest is that we don't discount what the person has learned, but let's just check them on that. And that's where I'm really big on this Australian model of the verification of competency. And there's some great pieces that I've put together for various clients that, I call it a multiple assessment pathway, where we do a quick little practical on some core competencies. We have a competency conversation, and then we have a summative exam that just covers some of the key things that they need to know from a theoretical perspective. So again, it's quite a different approach, but now you're checking to make sure that that person is still qualified in that. It's really interesting, and I'll kick it back to you after I tell this story. I had a lot of involvement with the large company at the LNG Canada build out in Kitimat. And one of the things that the general contractor put in place, the prime contractor put in place, was they did not care if you had a red seal in whatever trade. Every 30 days, you had a competency check done on you by some third party that was trained in that area. And it was quick. It was short. They would just come and they'd say, Kate, we're checking you on such and such. And they'd make you prove by your actions on the job that you could actually do that piece of the trade, check. So again, what it says is just because you have that certification doesn't mean that you're going to be the gladiator in the arena when it comes to actually doing it. So I do believe, before the safety side that I talked about earlier, and putting that quality assurance stamp on there, that's one of the mechanisms that we put in place.
Well, this is fantastic. Listen, Lindsay, I'm going to wrap it up at this point because there's more for us to talk about. And I think that you've told me offline that you're willing to come back and talk some more. So I want to thank you for the time that you spent with us on this Constructive Thinking podcast, and look forward to bringing you back for segment 2 of our conversation. So thanks very much, Lindsay. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Paul. Glad to help out, and look forward to other conversations.